Hi there. My name is Miguel Miranda, and I will be doing a brief presentation on sleep and stress based on the book by John Medina. When we think about sleep and stress, the first thing that comes to mind is yes, they both have a negative effect on the body. But have you ever really given much thought to the kind of sleeper you are and how it's specifically affecting you, or how stress physically affects the brain? Let's start by focusing on sleep, but more specifically, what kind of sleeper we are. Yes, they have a name for our certain type of sleeping patterns. So, according to Medina, there are three types of sleepers: larks, owls, and hummingbirds. Let's take a look at these birds and which tend to fit your sleeping preferences. 1 in 10 people are known as larks. These people are up by dawn and are usually ready for bed around 9 p.m. They seem to be most alert roughly before noon. I personally have a special liking towards larks because I tend to wake up at 4:15 in the morning in order to get to the gym before heading to work. To be perfectly honest, I became a lark in order to spend more time with my son. Otherwise, I would be getting home an hour before his bedtime. Breakfast tends to be the lark's favorite meal. I say tends because mine still happens to be lunch. On the other side of the sleeping spectrum are the owls, who tend to go to bed very late, sometimes as late as 3 a.m. For obvious reasons, owls require an alarm clock and probably need to snooze a few times before finally getting up. For those owls who have the luxury of getting to wake up on their own, they tend to wake up around 10 a.m. Unlike larks who prefer their breakfast of champions, owls love their dinner and tend to drink lots and lots of coffee to get them through their day. Last but not least, we get to the hummingbird type of sleeper. If 1 in 10 are larks and the other 1 in 10 are owls, that leaves the overwhelming majority of sleepers roughly around 8 in 10, known as hummingbirds. Hummingbirds pretty much fall somewhere in between the spectrum of larks and owls. Some hummingbirds are closer to owls, while others are much closer to larks. Although Medina states that our sleeping patterns tend to be in our genes, I also feel they are molded over time, determined by our lifestyles. I think I have been an owl, hummingbird, and a lark at some point in my life. So, what exactly happens to our bodies and brains when we are deprived of enough sleep, aside from the obvious exhaustion? Studies show that people whose sleep is restricted to less than 6 hours a night for 5 straight nights begin to have the same cognitive performance as someone who hasn't slept for 48 hours straight. Another effect that the lack of sleep has on the brain is the lack of blood flow, which directly affects the body's metabolism. The brain begins to overreact to its workload and begins to wear itself out. How many of us have begun to get irritable when we haven't had very good sleep? I know I have. Lack of sleep can also have negative implications on the body in other ways as well. When a person is sleep deprived, their ability to utilize the food they consume decreases by about a third. The ability to make insulin also begins to fail. I think it's pretty safe to say that consequences for depriving the body and the brain of sleep are much greater than some simple irritability and a headache. So let's now look at the benefits of sleep. Research has shown that healthy sleep can enhance learning not just a little but significantly. Sleep scientists seem to agree that sleep, well, isn't an exact science, but they are able to discover concrete improvements in people's abilities to solve mathematical problems. Sleep also has been shown to improve certain visual tasks, such as picking out objects from a sea of similar looking objects. Looks like you better get a good night's rest if you plan on playing Where's Waldo with anyone. Motor skills also seem to benefit from good sleep as well, but those skills required during learning procedures seem to be the most sensitive to getting some good night's shut eye. Now that we have seen the types of sleepers that there are, the physical effects of sleep deprivation, and the benefits of good consistent sleep, let's take a look at the effects that stress has on the brain and body. So, what exactly is stress? The truth is, it's actually not that easy to pinpoint, and not all stress has negative effects on the body and brain. Some stress actually enhances learning. Many people have different reactions to stress. Some athletes throw up before a big game, some people get sweaty palms. Every person seems to react to stress differently. Also, according to Medina, the body itself isn't a good indicator of stress because the same physiological mechanisms that cause a person to react to another person trying to hurt them is the same as when having sex. Yeah, that one caught me off guard too. In order to be stressed, there are three indicators that must be occurring at the same time. First, an outside party must be able to observe a physiological response. This could be in the form of crying or yelling at someone. Second, the person must want to avoid the situation. The person who is crying would want to get away from the situation causing that emotion. Third, the element of losing control and being helpless must be present. This particular person may not be able to get away from the person or situation causing the crying. Let's take a look at the effects that stress has on the cardiovascular system. Small doses of stress can actually boost cardiovascular performance. I'm sure that the pressure of doing well in each Olympic event this past summer gave Michael Phelps that extra boost during each event. Long-term stress, though, can cause major damage to the heart. Over time, a person may develop scarring along the inside of the blood vessels, eventually causing blockage. It is not surprising that many who suffer from long-term stress are at a much higher risk for a heart attack and a stroke. Similar to the effects on the cardiovascular system, acute stress actually has some positive effects on the immune system, such as your response to a flu shot and white blood cell activity. But long-term stress also has major negative implications on the immune system as well. This type of stress can actually decrease and eventually kill off heroic white blood cells. Long-term stress can also have major negative effects on the body's production of antibodies. This inhibits a body's ability to fight off infections. When I think of people in my life that are constantly stressed about one thing or another, they do seem to be sick more often than most other people that I know. Now, let's take a look at how stress affects our memory and our problem solving skills. With small amounts of stress, our ability to problem solve is actually better. Medina attributes this to the survival instincts required by our ancestors. We may not have to dodge saber-toothed tigers anymore, but the survival mechanisms allow us to respond quickly to other critical situations. People who suffer from long-term stress do not do math or process language very well. They have difficulty using prior knowledge to deal with the new situations. A person who is constantly stressed out will have overall problems with concentration and learning in general. Unfortunately, this reminds me of my older cousin trying to teach me to drive stick shift by pointing out every mistake and yelling at me. I just ended up exploding and getting out of the car. Cortisol, or the villain, is considered the stress hormone. These hormones like to attach themselves to the hippocampus region of the brain, which plays a major part in our learning process. Under extreme circumstances, stress hormones can actually kill off the hippocampus cells. Extreme long-term stress can actually lead a person into a depressive state. This feeling of helplessness causes people to feel as though this feeling is permanent. Now that we know a little about the villains in the biological attack of our intelligences, let's take a look at the hero known as BDNF, otherwise known as brain derived neurotrophic factor. Say that 3 times fast. This is a key member of a group of proteins. Biologically speaking, although these proteins do a great job of keeping neurons in our brains alive, under strong and prolonged attack of stress hormones, these BDNFs become overwhelmed. Prolonged stress can not only overwhelm these natural defenses, but they can damage them as well. I think we all have our personal stories about stress and how it has affected us in school or work. As educators, we're in a unique position where the two actually coincide. Everything we have heard of so far in this presentation brings us to this point where we think of the situations we have faced in our lives and how it affected us, whether it be our sleeping patterns or the stress we have dealt with. In my situation, my parents' divorce during my third grade year had some effects I had never really thought of. I realize now that it isn't a coincidence that I have a hard time remembering much of that year. I remember kindergarten much more than I do the third grade. I also recall not being the easiest person to be around during my first couple of years in college when I was taking a full load of classes and working 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. I now have a better understanding of the physical harm I was doing to myself. Maybe some of you can relate as well. John Medina has given us valuable information that we can take into account in order to prevent lack of sleep and stress from becoming overwhelming in our bodies and minds. We will never eliminate stress from our lives simply because stress is a natural part of life, but we can prevent it from causing physical and mental harm. It's so ironic that I present on this topic to you because I felt so much of what I've talked about throughout this presentation. My 200-pound best friend and canine companion, Soprano, passed away suddenly this morning, and it took me so much longer to complete this because I couldn't maintain focus and I kept forgetting my place during the process of this assignment. I can attest that this information is true and valuable.